Hello, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable panel discussion on estrangement to engagement, building family resilience and harmony. This is a roundtable discussion which will bring together diverse perspectives on healing family rifts, fostering connections, navigating the complexities of intergenerational conflicts. I want to especially thank everyone for joining us on a fast day, and a special shout out to those watching on YouTube later. I want to thank everyone who has given us questions on the Google Sheets, which were included in the message about tonight's event. In the future, that's the best way to get your question heard and answered. My name is Giddy. I'm a current Talmud former student at the Yeshiva at the Talmudic University of South Florida, and I'm your moderator for tonight. We're going to begin tonight with saying together, led by Rabbi Akiva Zweig, some Tehillim for our brothers and sisters currently in Israel.
Everyone, please feel free to say along with me. Obviously, it's not only a fast day. We're in the middle of basically a 2-year war, and obviously our tefillos are very, very needed. Part of the topic for tonight is empathy for all of our family, which is our extended Jewish people, and we all need this to be as successful as can be with the help of Hashem. Natseach Mizmor LeDavid. Ya'ancha Adonai b'yom tzara, Yisagevcha Shem Elohei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha mikodesh u'mitzion yisadeka, Yizkor kol minchosecha ve'olasecha yidasher nasela, Yiten lecha chilvavecha v'chol atzasecha yimalei, Niranana b'shu'asecha u'Shem Eloheinu nidgol, Yimalei Adonai kol mish'alosecha, Hata yadati ki Yoshia Adonai mishicho, Ya'anehu mishemei kacho, Pigvuros yesha yimino, Eile v'rechev ve'eile v'asusim, V'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir, Hema kare'u v'nafalu, V'anachnu kamnu v'nis odad, Adonai Hoshia, HaMelech Ya'aneinu v'yom kare'enu. We'll do now Kuf Lamed, of course, we're davening for everyone's safety, special protection for all the people on the front lines, and shalom for everyone. Shir HaMa'alos Mima'amakim Karasicha Adonai, Adonai Shim'a V'koli, Tihyena Aznecha Kashuvos, L'kol Tachanunai, Im Avonos Tishmarya, Adonai Miya'amod, Ki Imecha Hasalicha L'ma'an Tivarei, Ki Visi Adonai Ki V'san Nafshi, B'lid varo hochalti, Nafshi l'Adonai mishomerim laboker, Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, Ki im Adonai hachesed v'harbe imo fidus, V'hu yifte es Yisrael mikol avonosav. And everyone together, Achenu kol beis Yisrael, Hanusunim batzar v'ashivya, Omedim ben bayom uven bayabasha, Hamakom yerachim aleihim yotzi'im mitzar l'ravacha me'afelu la'or mishibot lig'ula, Hashtava agalo izman kariv, and Omar Amen. Giddy, you're on mute.
I thought I clicked the button. I guess I missed it. Thank you, Rabbi. With that, we will start tonight's program. Just a quick overview of how tonight is going to go. I will introduce our 3 panelists, and then I will ask them to. I will prompt them to give an opening statement, followed by questions which I have prepared in advance, informed by those people who have sent in questions on the Google documents. We'll give time for the panelists to respond, as well as encourage them to engage with each other. It is a very open and relaxed format. We encourage them. They are all incredibly distinguished, knowledgeable people, so we would love to hear them. Even though questions will be specifically for one panelist or the other, we would like to hear, obviously, all their wisdom. And then at the end, we will have time, hopefully, for questions from the audience. So we are first joined by Rabbi Akiva Zweig, who is the Rosh Yeshiva and Dean of Students at the Talmudic University of Florida in Miami Beach. He is a graduate of the institution with both a bachelor's and master's degree in Talmudic law and rabbinic ordination. He previously learned at Ner Yisrael Rabbinical College in Baltimore, as well as in many yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. He's renowned for various shirim in Gemara, Jewish philosophy, history, and ethics. Rabbi Zweig oversees the spiritual and personal development of high school, undergraduate, and kollel students while giving widely attended community classes each week. We are also joined by Dr. Marc Agronin, who is a board-certified adult and geriatric psychiatrist. He serves as the Chief Medical Officer of the Mind Institute. He is pioneering empathy care philosophy, delivers life-enhancing care for patients and families, both from diagnosis and action-based therapy to caregiver support and beyond. Dr. Agronin has a BA in psychology and philosophy from Harvard University and his MD from Yale School of Medicine. Dr. Agronin completed his psychiatry residency at Harvard Medical School and has a fellowship in geriatric psychiatry at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center. He is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and the American Association for Geriatric Psychiatry. And he is also an affiliate associate professor of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Adam Pollock is the founder of Aaron's Legacy, a dedicated service supporting families and individuals navigating the challenges of estrangement. With a distinguished background as an attorney, arbitrator, mediator, and business coach, and a certified intermediary in conflict resolution, Adam brings a wealth of experience to his work. He holds a BA in psychology from the George Washington University and a JD from University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Adam is certified as an estrangement mediator by 3 of the world's leading practitioners and researchers in estrangement. He specializes in guiding fractured families towards healing, and reconciliation. Adam's unique approach blends the Torah's time-honored peacemaking traditions with modern evidence-based protocols. His mission is to help nearly 30% of Americans who currently experience family estrangement find pathways to connection and understanding. Through his work at aaronslegacy.com, Adam offers counseling and mediation services tailored to the complex and sensitive nature of family estrangement, providing hope and practical solutions for those seeking to rebuild their most important relationships. So with that, we've introduced our incredibly distinguished panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Zweig, to give us an introduction about the Torah's perspective on relationships, family relationships, how important they are. So with that, Rabbi.
Thank you, Gidi. Thank you, Ohad. Very warm welcome to everyone, and a true appreciation for our panelists, co-panelists, Dr. Agronin and Adam Pollock. Just a couple of words of introduction right before I get to that point. We were supposed to hold this panel discussion a while ago when the war actually just broke out, when Adam and Gidi and I were all on a call planning this event. And because of the nature of the war, but also really the theme of Achdus, we felt it most appropriate to first do a panel discussion on the topic of everything that was happening in Eretz Yisrael with Iran and so forth. And of course, a lot of that is still ongoing, but that's really the idea. The idea is that we're all connected, and Hashem wants us to be all connected. We say it in our prayers. The Jewish people are a Goy Echad Ba'aretz. They are a singular nation on earth. Part of that singularity is our uniqueness, and part of that singularity is our unique ability to actually integrate into a true oneness. I feel very privileged that Adam Pollock is joining us. He's worked on this topic for years and years, and he's really doing incredible work. I'm hopeful that everybody will take advantage of that as the evening goes on, and he'll have, as Rosh Hashanah, plenty of time to explain his particular approach. I also have a very personal debt of gratitude to Adam for helping make my shidduch with my wife. So really, he was an instrument of shalom there as well. And in a similar vein, very privileged to be with Dr. Agronin. He's been a tremendous help to our family in many different ways. And both of these people are sincere, warm, genuine, caring, and deep thinking. And so it's really an honor to be discussing this with everyone, with them as experts. The Torah's view is that family is the essential building block for a forward-moving world. Ever since Bereshis, Adam and Chava, This is the idea. Hashem even particularly created the world only from one man and one woman, so that human beings would know their oneness and would know that all human beings come from the same source, and that we are meant to work together and synergize with each other, respect one another, and help one another. The Torah is very clear that what Avraham Avinu brings to the table is a special blessing to all the families of the earth. The Torah is very clear that it's not just Avraham introducing monotheism in a way that was really understandable and inspirational, but also that Avraham Avinu is the father that represents this idea that family is critically important. And I think it bears noting that, at least according to the rabbis, even after his father caused the death of his brother Haran and had him cast into the furnace, somehow Avraham managed to continue a relationship with Terach. They still traveled together and they still were a family together, to the point that the Torah wants to make sure that we know that Avraham cared about Terach and did not abandon him in his old age. Pretty astonishing stuff, actually. But that, again, is his commitment to family. There's a lot more to say on the subject. We'll get into a little bit more about machlokas and the Torah's view on shalom and how do we go about doing that. But I think as an introduction, the most important thing to be aware is that the Hashem view of the world is that he wants his children to get along. That's more important than anything. And that's why, even though the Tower of Babel, the people were literally fighting against God, but nonetheless, they were working together, they don't get the obliteration that the generation of the flood gets when they were stealing and robbing and murdering one another. And so with that in mind, let's see what we can do to help us maintain this perspective of achieving shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'm going to go next to Adam. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about, just help us define the terms here a little bit, because I think we all have some idea, but if you can give us some definitions that we can work with. What is estrangement? What does it look like? And then what is engagement? And what does that look like? Well, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. Estrangement is the disconnection, the cutoff of one person or more of a family completely from the other family members. It has now reached epidemic proportions. In fact, it's called the silent epidemic because people don't like to speak about it. A study was done a number of years ago showing that 27% of Americans are estranged or cut off from their family members. That number, I think most researchers believe, has gone up. It's almost 1 out of 3 families is experiencing some cutoff from a member of that close nuclear family. There are a number of reasons for it. The researchers have identified 8 strong reasons for it. And there are a number of ways that that a family can try to build resilience to prevent estrangement. My background is, as you mentioned, as an attorney, as a business person. And about 10 years ago, my wife's very dear friend, who's a clinical psychologist, came to her with an issue. Came to me with an issue that she was experiencing in her family, an issue dealing with religious differences. And she asked me because I was really the only religious person that she knew she could speak with. And I met with her, and I was able to resolve the issue very, very quickly. To me, it was an obvious issue. But thank God, Baruch Hashem, the issue was resolved. But since this psychologist only deals with helping people one-on-one, she started sending me families that were broken, families that were fractured. And as a chesed, I would work with them. Until about a year ago when my wife said, that's enough. You've got to do this full time. It's too important. There are too many families hurting, and this has to be now your full vocation. So I stopped my other activities and I formed Aaron's Legacy, which is devoted to helping families who are estranged reconcile. And there's so much more to be said about this, but I'll yield the floor at this point.
Well, thank you. There is a ton to say about it. I was talking to Ohad before we jumped on here, and I was saying I feel like we could do, maybe 25 hours straight of discussion about this topic because, as you pointed out, this is unfortunately a topic that is getting more and more salient. It's growing, what seems like exponentially. That the destructions of families, whether it's religious or political or any other reason, it seems to be unfortunately getting worse, not better. And to that end, next, I think we're going to go to Dr. Agronin. And my question to you, as well as just giving you the floor to say an opening statement, but the question to you is, what are some of the psychological and physical processes and tolls of family estrangement? And what are some of the benefits of psychologically and physically for engagement?
Well, first of all, it's a real honor to be on the program tonight, especially with Rabbi Zweig and with Adam, two real experts in this area, and I'm happy to try to lend some perspectives here. My focus as a geriatric psychiatrist is working with aging individuals, especially those who have significant cognitive needs. And in those situations, they often become very dependent on adult children to help them, or at least other adult relatives. And when you have estrangement either between an older person and an adult child or amongst children, it can become really excruciating at a time when someone has really significant needs. And I see this all the time. I would say that, the term estrangement can take on different forms, from family members who have nothing to do with one another, or those who are just, they're forced to have something to do with one another. And so there's fighting and bickering. And you can imagine, as a physician, meeting, with the patient and family, and most of the session is them arguing with each other about that. It's very difficult. And so we can talk about that. But a few things to say. First of all, I agree that there's an epidemic of this. I would point to social media as an unfortunately a very negative force here in terms of amplifying all the political and philosophical changes that people have. And it's amazing how family members are driven apart by who voted for whom and whether one believes in a certain vaccine schedule or whatnot, just issues that you never would have imagined in the past would drive families apart. And yet they serve as absolutely, really noxious elements. And I see this played out when I'm caring for someone, especially when there are medical issues that need to be addressed. And I'm going to focus just on aging individuals, but I think these are some generalities as well. There's also an epidemic of loneliness right now in social isolation. And the COVID-19 epidemic brought this out massively. And so when there's family estrangement, it just amplifies that social isolation, it amplifies that loneliness. And we know for aging individuals that loneliness is not only something that creates lots of different health problems, but it can be, it's not just life altering, but can be life ending for some people. You look at the rates of all sorts of illnesses and events, it's all increased associated with loneliness, not just depression, but cardiovascular events, cerebrovascular events, things like that. So loneliness and social isolation, which can be a direct result from estrangement, is a huge problem. And just in a very day-to-day practical way, it means lack of care for someone who needs it, especially someone who has either physical frailty or cognitive frailty. They just don't get the care they need because they don't have enough individuals or family around to help, or the right people, or there's bickering amongst the family. And so it leads to disruptions in care, and sometimes can be really devastating for the person. Now, I will say on the other hand, because, working with families like that over the years, I've worked with lots of families in which you had someone who, maybe was abusive or neglectful towards others in the family. And, sometimes there's a reason for estrangement, and sometimes there's an important reason for that. It's one thing to advise forgiveness, but that doesn't always come, or it's not always appropriate. Sometimes, especially when someone was truly abusive towards someone else. And, sometimes you have to look at workarounds with that. Or indeed, there's some situations in which a person's estrangement serves a purpose. So just an example, I've worked with families in which, especially since I work in a nursing home, I've had people come in who clearly were abusive parents or neglectful, and there's a reason why their children don't want to be involved with them. And it might be damaging for the person, but for the adult children, sometimes it can be important for them because it's too disruptive to their lives. Now, one can argue many different ways how to address this. I wrote a piece a number of years ago in a major publication about. I start off by the piece by talking about someone when I had a patient whose adult daughter would have nothing to do with her. When I called, she said, "Look, my mother was a monster, and you cannot ask me to be, it's not healthy for me, it's not good for me or my family to have any involvement with her." And, I wrote about this and how families get around this. And it was interesting because the response, a lot of people responded to this because saying, yes, sometimes reconciliation can be important or good, or at least a working relationship, but sometimes not. And you have to respect that as well, and the boundaries that people may impose for that reason. So it can be very, very complicated. And so that's why I'm eager myself to learn and to hear both Rabbi and Adam's perspective on this. Because sometimes, often estrangement, the reasons for it may be legitimate or they may be frivolous or somewhere in between. But these are things that always have to be addressed within the larger context here. From my vantage point at the end of the day, I'm trying to care for someone, and so I need to decide what are the best resources that will be helpful and not disruptive to the person's care. Those complexities need to be factored in here.
Thank you, Dr. Agronin. So for many of you may not know me, but aside from being a student at the Yeshiva, my background is in clinical social work as a therapist. That's what my training in, and I wrote my thesis on male depression, which is I think largely because of that loneliness epidemic you're talking about, and that estrangement is a big part of that. Social media, the pandemic, all these things play into it. So I think these are like massive, and maybe I don't know, maybe I'm talking ahead of myself, but maybe we should do another one of these specifically on loneliness, which is deeply intertwined with this conversation. But to really carry on with what Dr. Agronin was talking about, I'm going to go back to Rabbi Zweig and ask him a question of, are there halachically valid reasons to cut family members off? Is there a difference between abuse and not abuse? Is it only abuse? Is it only halachically okay when there's safety involved? What is that halachically? What does that look like? What are the nuances there?
Yeah, so that's obviously a great question. Part of the problem with talking in forums and panels is that it's hard to go into detail and nuance. And one of the things that I'm hoping everybody is going to do is take this conversation for some of the general points and then reach out to people like Adam, Dr. Agronin, and I guess I could say other rabbis. Because there's
I'll say they should reach out to Rabbi.
Okay. No, there's a lot of work for everybody to do, and so many case-specific things. But definitely, self-protection is a very important part of conducting one's life. I do think, however, that people are much more capable than they think about handling difficulty and adversity, and what maybe people are considering to be very harsh treatments are sometimes worth confronting, trying to make better through real dialogue and kind of setting boundaries. And I'm concerned that too many people are using the safety abuse terminology that is important when appropriate, and that's all part of the problem, is how do you define exactly when it's appropriate. But I would just caution that many of us tend to think that, well, it's their problem, they started it, they're the ones that are doing the wrong thing, and therefore they deserve to be cut off and we shouldn't pursue it. And this is the part that I'm hoping Adam is really going to step in next and address. But what we learn from the Torah, and this, by the way, is an example of Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg's Asal learning, whose yahrzeit is today, happens to be, which is great that we're meeting, and the whole topic of the 3 weeks and Sinas Chinam and not getting along, it's so appropriate. But what we learned from Moshe Rabbeinu is that when Dasan and Aviram constantly struggled and fought with him, to the point where they were part of the Korach rebellion, this is over years that this is happening, and then Moshe Rabbeinu sends a message, hey, let's talk. And Rashi says, because if you don't send a message, let's talk, so then you're strengthening the machlokas. That means even though Moshe Rabbeinu did nothing wrong ever to Dasan and Aviram, they were the ones that are fomenting the divide and the complaining and ultimately the rebellion. If Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't send a message, come, let's talk, then he bears responsibility for sharing machlokas. So I think it's really worth making a distinction here between it's difficult to deal with people. They have all these craziness ideas in their heads versus I'm somehow really being damaged by them. Because if I'm not really being damaged by them and I can put some of the barbs that they say or things about me to the side, like Dustin and Aviram were definitely doing, and just try to have a conversation, it's absolutely worth it.
Thank you for that, Rabbi. I think a big part of being able to do that healthily is setting proper and healthy boundaries. So for the next question is for both Adam and Dr. Agronin. I'll go to Adam first and then Dr. Agronin. Is what are boundaries? Because I think it's a word that's used, as Rabbi said, there's been a lot of bleeding over of therapy terminology into the regular world without people having the proper background to actually understand the terminology and what they mean. So what are boundaries? How do we set those boundaries? And is it possible to set boundaries without severing ties? So we'll go first to Adam.
Okay, so first I just want to follow up on what the rabbi just said a second ago. The reason why Moshe was considered to be less popular and less well-liked than his brother Aaron was because instead of having people come to him with a machlokas, Aaron pursued peace. He was known as a lover and pursuer of peace, and he literally traveled wherever he found a machlokas was existing and made the effort to make peace. He was a true third-party Jewish peacemaker, which still exists today. Again, that's for another topic. But let's get back to, before we get to boundaries, I have to lay the foundation here. What we are talking about is not what Marc mentioned, which is real neglect or real abuse, which researchers have found to be a minority of the cases in which, a small minority in the cases in which estrangement occurs. Most cases involve other reasons. There is, let's start with the ideological battle that's going on right now over family. I mentioned in the United States, it's about 30%, 27 to 33% of people are estranged. In Sweden, it's 60%. There's an ideological battle going on over the family with the family preservationists like us on one side, those who believe that family is forever, that parents should be honored, that parents should receive respect and appreciation for what they've done. And also on the other side, we have the estrangement ideologists who believe that there is no such obligation for a child anymore to honor his parents, to have appreciation, that to have respect, that this has to be earned. That even though a child could be raised in the most lavish and wonderful ways with the greatest parents in the world, the parent has to continue to earn that respect in order to get it. This is the ideology of the estrangement ideologists. Now, if you're doubting in any way what I'm talking about, that this is ridiculous, that these are outliers, go online. You will see thousands, if not millions, of social media coaches, podcasts, therapists, preachers, promoting what they refer to as going no contact. Going no contact. They view it as a noble and courageous response to perceived trauma or abuse inflicted by parents. They promote what's called a pure relationship, which is what the British sociologist Anthony Giddens termed, which is something along the lines of a relationship where both needs are being met. And as soon as those needs are no longer being met, the relationship ends. It's kind of like buying bread in the grocery store. If you don't have the money, you don't get the bread. And that's the pure relationship that is being touted today. Let me just give you some examples. I read recently, there were 2 New York Times headlines, articles. One read, "I broke up with my abusive mother and I don't regret that decision." The second was, "It wasn't you, it was your parents." The second article was written in support of a book entitled "Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents," which spent 6 weeks on the New York Times bestselling list. The author gave permission to adult children to assume that their shortcomings are the fault of their parents. Now, the battle, again, I could talk so long about this. The battle is giving adult children, this is where it mainly exists, adult children estranging their parents. It gives them the ability to find reasons why they are victims. They're victims based upon the way that they were raised, and they no longer have to take full responsibility for why they haven't reached their potential. And it's not their fault, because in many cases, therapists who have become the new rabbis of the world, of our country in particular, are telling them, this is why you are not who you want to be, the way you were raised. You did not get what you needed. You even, in some cases, had prenatal trauma that existed before you were born. And in many cases, the adult children are only too willing to accept this diagnosis and cut off their parents because their parents are triggering them. This mirrors the whole world of gender options. Right now, there are 300 different genders on Facebook that you can choose from, depending upon who you want to be. This radical individualism has affected the family, and it's tearing it apart. And again, I just cited one of the 8 major reasons, which is therapists, and not all therapists, just some therapists. And then there are 7 more that we could get into if we have time.
Thank you, Adam. Dr. Agronin, so talk to me about boundaries.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's as I said, it's very informal. This is really about you guys are the experts, so it's really wherever you guys want to take it is more than fine with me. These are just my questions that I was interested in, but wherever you guys want to take it is totally fine.
Adam, jump in if you wanted to.
For sure.
Okay, thank you. Boundaries is one of the 8. Children who are raised today and for the past generations have had curated childhoods for the most part, particularly among the middle and upper classes. Curated meaning that from the time that they wake up, they are driven to school. Today, today 20% of kids walk to school. 2 generations ago, 90% of kids walk to school. They're driven to school. They have play dates curated. They have their music lessons, their sports lessons, their curated play dates. They want to get into the right schools. Their parents are absolutely helicoptering them so to make sure that they get into the right schools so that they can compete in a very, very competitive environment. Some children at some point in their lives say, I've had enough. I've had enough. I need the unfettered right to be myself. I've grown up. I don't want to have my parents define who I am anymore. They're calling me 6 times a day on this cell phone, which I can't get away from. The technology in many cases is creating boundaries that are limitless. And so I have adult children who really don't blame their parents for anything other than being too present. And they don't have the skills to cut them off, or I'm sorry, to back them off, so they cut them off. So if you're a parent, my first bit of advice to you, if you're a parent or a grandparent, and you have the sense that you might be overdoing a little bit, unilaterally take the step back before your child or your adult child or grandchildren do. Take a step back, let them define the boundaries, because if they feel too imposed upon, they eventually will set the boundaries themselves. Boundaries are a very big issue.
Yeah, I think it's about if I understood, it's about internalizing the responsibility. At least from what you're saying from the parents, about understanding what they've done and internalizing that responsibility and taking the proactive step.
Right. My advice is for the parent or grandparent to be sensitive to maybe they are overstepping their boundaries. Maybe the child or the grandchildren don't really need or want as much time and space with the parents or grandparents as they are getting, but they don't know how to say it kindly. Because, let's face it, we as parents and grandparents want to spend more time with our kids and grandkids than they do with us. John Stewart said, it's funny, when I was growing up, I wanted to spend more time with my father than he wanted to spend me. Now that I'm a parent, I want to spend more time with my kids than they want to spend with me. What happened? Something happened, and I think he's describing that shift that I'm referring to. So yeah, the kids for boundaries, and one of the third issues that we're going to talk about, hopefully, of the causes of estrangement are sons and daughters-in-laws. And sons and daughters-in-laws very often use boundaries as a reason to pull their husband or wife away from the family, away from his or her family. They're overimposing themselves. They're not giving us the space to be. They're giving us too much judgment and criticism and advice. We need to be ourselves. And you, as a man, particularly the daughter-in-laws, have more power in this than the son-in-laws. The daughter-in-laws can use masculinity as a means of a tool against their husband, saying, look, stop being such a mama's boy. You left your parents and you married me. That's what the Torah says. So stop being so close to your family. I see this a lot, unfortunately. So again, parents or grandparents, be sensitive to these issues of boundaries and son and daughter-in-laws. Make your son and daughter-in-law your best friend, because if that war breaks out, you will lose.
Yeah, Adam. So, Dr. Marc, maybe you can give us your take on how you see boundaries best implemented. Also, how you suggest people create boundaries. I guess both in the context of estranged relationships, but also I guess now Adam brought in something which I think is really interesting, which is the boundaries between spouses to protect those relationships. So it's almost preventative. So boundaries, I think, are almost preventative in some ways.
Yeah, or several things I want to reflect upon. One thing, and Adam brought this up, and I agree wholeheartedly, is, I think there is emerging a deep concern about therapy or psychotherapy and the training of the therapists. And, it's always been, a secular, for the most part, underlying philosophy, but I think it's become more ideologic in many ways. And I think that's very problematic and very concerning. Because, just as people in past years would say, well, you don't want to bring religion into therapy because then you're going to be, coercing people down one road. The issue is now certain ideologies have been brought into therapy, which are coercing people down certain pathways, and it's an enormous problem. The role of a physician, as with a therapist, is, do no harm, and you're there to, identify, a condition and help the person get better from it. And that has to be done in a very judicious way, in a very careful way. And I think there's so many different factors nowadays which are influencing this, but it's very concerning. And that's when you see much of what Adam was describing today. And that's why I think this is such a valuable conversation to talk about what the Torah says here and how that can be integrated into, some basic values that we bring to therapy. For me, when thinking about boundaries, and, I have to reflect upon the individuals and families that I work with, there are two things that come to mind. One is that it has a lot to do with communication. I mean, boundaries, you can define it as, something that's pleasant or unpleasant for someone. And so you don't want someone to, trespass beyond a certain point, regardless of what we're talking about. But really what it comes down to is someone being able to communicate how they're feeling about something. If someone is saying or doing something that's upsetting to them, to be able to communicate that to them and to have a dialogue about it. And underlies this is a key term, and that's the term empathy. And that's, there's certain components to empathy. Our brains are wired to be empathic, meaning that we are wired to feel what other people feel. And the way you get that is being able to listen and observe someone without jumping in an issue with your own judgments or comments or whatnot, be able to say, tell me your perspective. I want to hear and I want to listen. I want to reflect upon that, and being able to imagine that person's perspective. Empathy can be key. It's a natural instinct that we have that can help us to understand that, and that can begin to help bridge the gap here. And to think about when we, the boundaries, is it right? Is it fair? Does it make sense? And sometimes regardless, when you've been in a situation, I work with many, many families where someone, was very unpleasant to deal with for various reasons, but they still are able to have a relationship and craft a relationship, but it's, in a certain context. You can call those boundaries, but it has to flow from the ability to communicate and have empathy for that other person. Um, but it can be very difficult to do this. One, as Adam pointed out, because, if you have a certain philosophy or ideology against that, um, the therapist can become disruptive rather than bring things together. And so that's an enormous problem. And two, sometimes you have very specific things that need to be achieved. I mean, if I'm working with a patient who, needs a certain medication or treatment, I don't necessarily have the time, or it's not my role to be able to bring together two different children who may have different perspectives on that. I have to, look, if you're standing over someone who needs surgery, there's only so much discussion is going to go on if you need to save their life. And likewise, in certain circumstances, you're not there to solve the whole issue. This is where, some Adam's role can be so critical there. So we have to be realistic in those circumstances. But I think it's the role of increasingly physicians and therapists can help promote some of those connections rather than obstruct them.
Yeah, I think you hit the exact right word there, Doctor. Connection. What you're talking about is building connection between parents and children. And the better we are at doing that, the younger they are, the tighter and the more resiliency those relationships have as they're stretched down the road. Part of the problem that we're facing with this estrangement issue is that the connections were not strong. The parents were not great listeners and empathetic and just listening to what the emotional response of the child was rather than trying to fix it. So as you said, it's not easy, but we can all get there. But as that lack of connectivity breaks down, it can also be rebuilt. And that's what I do in my work is I try to transform these negative relationships by giving the parents and the children new tools and ways to connect and build resiliency going forward. The family, as we mentioned, as the rabbi mentioned, is the primary structure upon through which Jewish identity and values are passed. It's critical. So when the family structure breaks down, there are a lot of negative impacts, not only to Jewish, but to non-Jewish families and to the individuals. From hearing parents, I listen to the pain that they suffer from being estranged from their adult children and their grandchildren unwittingly is worse than the grief from death in many cases. Because when someone dies, it's a permanent event. It's something that you can grieve and get over. But when you can't speak to your child or your grandchildren for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 years, that grief is debilitating because you never know if it will ever fix. It will ever be fixed, if it can ever be corrected. So what happens in those cases is the adult children learn not resiliency, but the easiest thing to do is to cut and run when there's a problem because they haven't learned to deal with conflict with their parents. See, there's a difference between conflict and trauma. And this is one of the things that the younger generations haven't really worked through. Conflict is good. Resolving conflict is a good thing. It's nothing that we should run from. It's something we should push through. But sometimes conflict becomes blown up and we don't have the skills to resolve it. And it becomes trauma. It becomes trauma to that child. One of the things that we've seen is a deepening and broadening of the diagnostic tools in your field, doctor, that we've seen. The diagnostic code in the 50s listed, I think, 43 psychological diagnostic terms. Now there's over 200. And the more things like trauma, toxicity, immature, bullying, the more those terms become broadened and deepened and become tools for therapists to diagnose people, which are very vague terms, the more the estrangement can build inside the family structure and grow and actually collapse. So again, I'm really struggling here because there's just so much to talk about. There's so much information I want to get over and so much help that I want to provide, but I don't want to overdo my time. So.
Well, this is where a couple of things I'd say. One, values are important because you're right. Sometimes we have to put the labels aside and just talk about what are our values here. We want to have connections with people. We want to have, family unity, and that goes above and beyond these labels. Which the problem in psychology and psychiatry is that our diagnostic scheme is based on phenomenology. What I mean by that is that, if someone says that they have high blood pressure, it's based on something you can measure. You can measure their blood pressure. It's a metric, something that you can look at. If we say someone is depressed or someone is anxious, it's based on cluster of symptoms, which you can't really test for. There's not a blood test or anything for that for the most part. And so, you can take these phenomena and match them up in many different ways. Now, certain conditions we know pretty consistently hang together, but it also lends itself to this explosion of different conditions, which, might not carry the same validity. And also politics and ideology get in the way because people will dismiss or include certain things based on, certain other agendas rather than on the science of it. So it becomes, an issue, and it gets in the way of this whole process of what we're trying to do here with families.
Absolutely, and I think especially when the diagnoses can change. For any of those interested, you can go look up the old definition of this diagnostic criteria for trauma. Used to be very different than the new one in terms of what it required of the event, and it's very interesting to see how things change and why they change, and how that changes the way that we think about things as a society and as a culture.
And one thing I'll add, I think what's become a fundamental problem is people rely on half their, medical or psychiatric care from, Instagram, TikTok, places
Yeah,
like
the
that. I mean, people come in with,
self-diagnosis.
yes, with more questions about all sorts of crazy, formulas and supplements and things that have no basis in science, and yet they hang their hat on those things. And what it's done for in people in the medical field and is it really de-emphasizes so much of what you're trying to do, because people will come in and they want to alter this or change this. And I will say, I think, as a religious community, we need to, I think we have an obligation to really adhere towards the highest standards of science and scientific knowledge that help inform what we do medically. I'm distressed when I see people, and I see this with patients all the time, who are running to all sorts of charlatans and other people with, all sorts of wild theories that really do a disservice to this. And I think that translates into when we talk about these issues, because people develop these ideologies and these theories which have no basis in science, but then they apply them to the type of work that we're trying to do, and it becomes very disruptive.
Yeah, and if I could just say a quick plug for aaronslegacy.com. I was browsing it today, and there's some really great science on there. Speaking of science, if you go into the research tab, Adam and his team have compiled a great list of all peer-reviewed journal articles that discuss estrangement and some of the processes and some of the pitfalls. And so, speaking of science, I can definitely advise everyone to go there. It's a good place to start. And speaking of religion, I thought we could talk about something that was brought up earlier, which is a source of many people for estrangement, which is religious tension. I think both directions. When people, a family that started off as very religious, very orthodox, and a child or a parent or a spouse decides they no longer wish to live that lifestyle, and they become less or not at all orthodox, not at all observant. And the other direction as well, people who start off as secular and one member of the family decides to become more observant, that can cause, I think, a lot of stress in the family and can lead to estrangement. So I want to start with Rabbi Akiva Zweig. What is the Torah approach there, right? Because there are a lot of Torah tensions there. A lot of these questions end up becoming somewhat halachic in nature, even though they're not really halachic in nature. Like, where can I eat? Can I eat with my family? How do I do this? So if I can go to Rabbi for just a little bit there about what is the Torah approach to when one member of the family decides to lead, a radically different lifestyle than the others when it comes to a religious-based decision.
Yeah, obviously a great question. And I'm going to talk about that. Also, it was posted, what is the halachic definition of abuse, which is also another great question. But I actually first do want to start, before getting to either one of those, with the overarching concept that is something that we do discuss a lot here at the yeshiva and in our classes. It's very hard to help people that are not open to being helped. And when it comes to like traumatic situations, when people have been estranged and cut off, so they might be very burning with the question of what can I do? And you get sometimes the feeling that we're clapping with one hand. Now, I know Adam has some specific strategies of how to help the other side gain a new listening or a new understanding. But the point is that everybody needs to be able to self-reflect and self-evaluate. And in today's generation, super duper hard to achieve. It's one of the reasons that Torah learning in general is so important. So a class like this, what I'm hoping everybody here can take from it is how to help themselves see differently and open themselves up to new opportunities for connection, but also just to encourage everyone with whom you have some degree of ability to, advise or influence, that they should learn. Because when a person is willing to learn, the boundaries, the safety nets, what you define as abuse becomes much more manageable, because you're coming from a very different position of strength and awareness, and you're able to handle. So when you go back to the question of what is the definition of halachic abuse, I mean, God forbid, let's say somebody's parent or child has Tourette's and they call them, 4-letter words all the time. Okay, that's an illness. Does that mean the person listening to it is suffering emotional, psychological abuse? Now, the person might not have Tourette's, but they might have other problems that are causing them to say these very mean things. And does a person have the fortitude and the resilience to say, unfortunately, this person is not well, and you put it to the side? Just like, God forbid, when an older, family member is experiencing Alzheimer's, we have to be able to look at it that they're not well, not that they've suddenly become a horribly mean, rotten person. And so what's the definition of abuse? I think real damage, but the ability to handle for some people and not get damaged has been severely incapacitated in our times, because people seem to be very fragile, have very little willingness to look outside of themselves and say, well, maybe I don't need to be treated in the fashion that I think I should be treated. Maybe I can just put that to the side and go for the bigger value of connection and family unity that we're discussing here. So that is, I think, very important. So what's the definition of halachic abuse? Is damage. And what's real damage? When I've been really violated, I don't think name calling should really fall into that category. Don't get me wrong. I don't think you have to sit there and listen to, being yelled at, and, you can remove yourself from the situation also. But I think you have to really ask yourself, am I being damaged? Or is it just that I don't want to deal with it? And if I don't want to deal with it, is that right? And I should need to ask myself the question, maybe I should deal with it. And so when it comes to a family member that has a different religion, and in this country, it seems if you're of a different political party, that could be a different religion. And, again, really, you can't handle a disagreement of that nature. I started off by citing the example of Terach and Avraham, and that was real damage that happened. And somehow Avraham is able to overcome it for the sake of a higher value. Ultimately, his father Terach does teshuvah. We even mentioned Terach on Pesach night in the Haggadah. When you talk about, let's say, idolatry, as my father has often pointed out, Yaakov was living in Lavan's house for 20 years. That's the Torah's description. I lived in your house for 20 years. And Lavan is an idolater. He didn't clean out the idolatry when it came to Yaakov. He has his idols all around. And he's putting up with that and raising his family in that circumstance. Am I saying that that's ideal? No, but if there are reasons and you hope to have a bigger gain, so we learn how to deal with those things. And I think that applies to, different political views and different religious points of views, 100%.
Yeah, that's very astute. The values and political differences are one of the 8 causes of estrangement. In fact, of those estranged families, 1 out of 3 have cited political differences as the reason why they are estranged. But the huge cultural shift that we've experienced in the past 2 or 3 generations, as I mentioned, as we've gone from a family to an individualized priority, parental authority has eroded, and there's less respect for adults and the traditions. And many parents are sort of stuck, have been caught in that trap where they were raised and they were taught to raise children in a certain way that doesn't work today. Today, it would be unheard of to potch your child. When I was growing up, it was the norm. And that goes for the way you speak to your children, the way you talk to your children, the way you discipline your children, the way you give to your children. There has been this shift, and that value shift in generations is one of the major causes of estrangement. Another one is divorce. I want to share with everybody here that if you or anybody you know is going through a divorce, first of all, try not to, obviously. But if there's no way not to, please, please, please do not alienate the children. Do not try to make yourself feel better by alienating your children against your spouse, because that is one of the major, if not the major reason why families estrange. Children who are involved in a divorce are very vulnerable. They have to choose sides. They see their parent very often. They have to see their parents as vulnerable, no longer as part of a family unit, but as individual, sometimes flawed individuals. And the breakdown in their security and structure, it causes tremendous insecurity and anxiety to them. And that doesn't go away as they get older. It may even fester. So by alienating your children against the other spouse causes them to have to choose. Now remember, 50% of all of us are each of our two parents. Our DNA is 50% our mother and 50% our father. So when you convince a child that their parent is bad, evil, wrong, then part of them is affected as well. But not only that, it causes them anxieties and insecurities that fester, and in future very well may result in an estrangement. So do your best if you're going through something like that, or if you know somebody that's going through a divorce, to please give them this advice.
Adam, so that's really good advice, I think, and I think the rabbi really clearly set the table there for the importance of the family staying together, or staying in contact, staying not becoming estranged from each other. I was hoping you can give us a little bit of a look inside the mediation process when you're working with a newly observant person or someone who decided to leave observance. How do you work at getting past the values barrier? Because I think as you said, it can, as the rabbi said, and as you said, values are not just religious, but in this case, I think that's the salient topic for many people here. How do you give us a look into your process around mediation and working with the family to get past that barrier?
Great question. Just to give you some data, in the past 3 months, I've spoken at 6 synagogues, and almost to a number, 10% of each of those synagogues have come to me, of each of those attendees have come to me after for assistance. So to think that this isn't going on in our community would be a mistake. Now, where's it happening? It's happening with adult children and their parents. This is 90% of the cases. You see it with siblings as well, but very often the siblings don't have any need or want to reconcile, so they don't come to me. But it's mainly the parents of the adult children who've estranged them that are in great pain, and they will do anything to reconcile. Now, what is the process? The process is unfair. And in fact, they have to do everything, because in any power situation, in any negotiation, the one with the most power is the one that wants it least. The children who have estranged want it least. So very often they either reach out, the parents have to reach out to me, or I advise them how to reach out themselves to the children, which they've done before, very often, many times, and how to do it in a way that the children can be heard. that the children hear that the parents understand what has happened. And even though it's not fair, the parents have to humble themselves. The parents have to work to see the world through their children's eyes, to understand that they've experienced blockages in not being able to understand what their child needed at the time that they needed, that they had blind spots and not seeing that their children were suffering or not experiencing the type of development that they needed. And it's not fair. It's not fair. But I tell the parents and the grandparents, do you want fairness or do you want to have a relationship with your children? And so they have to do the very, very difficult work. And some parents refuse, particularly men. Men have a much more difficult time with their egos and with admitting that they were wrong when they don't feel that they were, that they have to kowtow to their children when their children should come to them. And so these families often never reconcile. But the parents and the grandparents, particularly the parents, the grandparents are basically just they're victims throughout, without regard to any fault at all. They may be wonderful parents and wonderful grandparents, but because the parents have been estranged, the grandparents go along with them. But the parents have to bend over backwards, and in many cases, that's not even enough. The average reconciliation is 4.5 years after the estrangement occurred. 71% of the time they reconcile with the father, and 82% of the time they can reconcile with the mother. 90% of the people that you see in estrangement reconciliation groups are women. The mothers can't let go. The fathers suffer, but they're more able to move on. The women will dig in and want to be a mother again. And they're tenacious, Baruch Hashem, and sometimes we're able to through the test of time and through the grace of God, the children are willing to let them back in. But the technique is first and foremost to get the parents to understand that this is not an equal negotiation. This is not an equal power struggle. They have to bend over backwards to see the world, what they could have done better, what they missed, to help the children realize that they have transformed themselves. They're willing to go into therapy if necessary, whatever it takes to give that child the opportunity to see that the parent has changed.
Thank you. So I think the way we'll do is just being cognizant of the time, and I'm sure everyone's very hungry and thirsty and didn't have coffee this morning. So I think the best way to do this is I have one question for Dr. Marc, and then I have one more question for Adam, and then one more question for Dr. Marc, and then we'll go into the questions that have been sent in. There are 3 of those, and then we will close out. Does that work for everyone?
Sure.
Okay, great. So, Dr. Agronin, keeping in the same theme of how do we push past this values barrier? In your time as a psychiatrist, as a doctor working with families, going through problems, going through estrangement, what are some psychological strategies that you can share that can help relatives both push past the values barrier, but then also handle the feelings of betrayal when people's choices conflict with what their stated desires? Because as Adam said, this is not an equal power negotiation.
This is why, thank God we have Adam, the work he's doing, because it's not a common area, and we need more people focused on that. And it needs to be grown, because it's not, it's often not a priority across many different mental health settings. And I would just point out that people are living much longer today, and so these are not conflicts that unfold over a couple of years. They can unfold over decades. So we need to be mindful of that. So I will just tell you, just focus on one thing, and I'm sure Adam has can add extensively to this. But for me, the question is, what does someone want to achieve? What are they motivated to achieve? There's a type of therapeutic approach called motivational interviewing, where you really want to find out what does someone want, what do they seek, and use that inclination and that energy to get them to where they're going. And, sometimes people have to understand that if a connection is not going to necessarily be, the most wonderful, loving relationship that you might imagine. Sometimes it's a working relationship. Sometimes it's getting together every once in a while. Setting those goals are important so people have, can meter out what they can do now, sometimes what they're willing to do, but at least to get to kind of a good enough space for them that at least is a good starting place. And so, for me, I mean, again, I'm in a situation where there often are very specific care needs. And so I try to rally people around one particular goal or one particular area in which they can all at least settle on or agree with, and that they set their expectations realistically. You might not get out of this the type of loving relationship that you envision or fantasize about. Maybe you never had that, but maybe there's a form of it, a version of it that you can. But this is where people need work to understand that, to be able to reset their expectations. So it can be, sometimes that's a lot of individual work to get them there. Or if they're not able or willing to do that, at least if you can get them around one point or agree. So for instance, right, if I'm working with an elderly parent, sometimes just about how often someone may come see them or visit them. It may be about siblings who agree on one particular schedule, whether it's coordinated, whether they're there together or not. At least they've coordinated, they're working together on something. So you kind of set something very discrete and have them collaborate on that. And that may be all you're going to get, but it may also lay the basis for, future connections thereafter.
Thank you for that. So I now want to go to discussing from all three, the Rabbi, from Adam, and from Dr. Agronin, the topic of resiliency. So start with Adam. Adam, I know you do a lot of work with resiliency programs, proactive strategies for families to strengthen those relationships and to create resiliency to avoid future estrangement. So can you give us a look inside of what that looks like, and maybe some takeaway or some quick high level thoughts on how can we build that resiliency so we avoid future estrangement?
Sure. Rabbi Russell, who is an expert in child rearing, has done a lot of work in this resiliency, how you raise children or restore children to resiliency, because really resiliency is a very important thing. It's sort of the opposite of cutting and running when you run into a challenge. It's working through it. And some of the things that Marc was talking about, or we're talking about, deal with building a connection to the parents and the children, making them understand each other, or having the opportunity to see the world through the other's eyes. So we'll go through exercises together where we will ask the parent or the child to say something and ask the other side to repeat what they heard in their own words. And you would be surprised how difficult this is. And that shows a lack of connectivity, and a lack of connectivity is a lack of resilience. So we work on the communication. The communication is very important. Communication is very important so that we can sift through and find out whether something is a real conflict, or if it's just a disagreement, or if it's a real trauma. And the more we work together in our communication, the better able we are to build resiliency in the relationship. What we all want, particularly children, is to be heard, to be understood. So often, what we want to do, particularly as fathers and grandfathers, is to solve the problem. We hear an emotional need and we want to jump in and solve the problem. That's not what, in many cases, the child is asking for. They're asking to just be heard. So when you hear somebody that is in need, and you hear somebody that is in an anxious time or in pain, just listening to them and being with them, that builds connection, And that connection builds resiliency in the relationship. The more we do that, the more we build a resilient relationship. The more we do that in our families, as we are raising our children, they should consider us as parents to be the first place that they want to go when they have a problem. That's a very good test if you're building a resilient relationship with your children. If they come to you with their problems, if they come to you with anything that they're facing, that is a wonderful litmus test for whether there's going to be resiliency in the relationship. If they don't, if they're going other places, if they're going to friends, other people, then that's an area where you need to work on it with that child. And you do it by listening, active listening, which is a skill, as Marc mentioned. We can learn to actively listen. So to build resiliency is to build connectivity, and we do that by building our communication through active listening. It's not just putting the phone down and looking at the person. It's really hearing who they are and how they want to be heard. When we are in our sessions, after we go through the difficult process very often of getting the adult children to agree to a reconciliation mediation, we start going through these processes, and it doesn't take very long, maybe 2-3 sessions at the most. And then I work out an agreement for the parties, where they built the agreement based upon their proposals, what they want to see in the relationship. My mother wants to see me 5 times a month. I can't do it. I can only live with 2. Mom, can you live with 2? I can live with 3. Fine. In the agreement now, 3 times. Mom, I just got a call from your daughter saying you want to see her for the 4th time. You're violating the agreement. That's going to break down the communication. That's going to break down the resiliency. That's why we wrote the agreement. Stick to the agreement. The agreement are the guardrails to keep this relationship moving forward, built on the needs and the wants of both parties, so that when they leave me, they have a document that they can hold up and say to each other, look, this is what we agreed to. This will keep our relationship safe. This will keep us going and moving towards a transformative, happy, mutually supportive relationship based on that agreement. So that's how I build resiliency in the reconciliations of the estrangements that we work on.
Thank you, Adam. Dr. Agronin, from your experience, because you have obviously seen, as you said, thankfully not that many very, very bad estrangements, but hopefully you've seen lots of families that have great connections. So what are some things from your experience as you see them later in life? What are the things that you've learned are some really good tactics and strategies that we could implement in our lives to build those connections now?
Well, I think kind of jumping off from what Adam talked about, this notion of resilience, there are many different resilience factors that can help with that. And I think what we're talking about is, there always is going to be conflict. The question is, how do people deal with that conflict? And that's where these resilience factors come in. So, think about families. I think that, and this is where I think, Judaism jumps right in and lends so much here, is one, when there is a sense of respect and interest in the history of people in the family. And I think of this in terms of the elders of the family, but I always encourage families, and I see some of the best families, they really know and understand the family history. They're interested in it. They inquire about it. And there's a respect for the kind of matriarchal or patriarchal figures in the family. And I've worked with families that the matriarch or patriarch has advanced Alzheimer's disease, and so they don't communicate a lot, but yet they are the glue of the family. Their presence is the most powerful thing for the family because there's that sense of respect and awe for that person, and they will do anything to help them and to treat them. I think sometimes, to be frank, doctors and caregivers can get annoyed with families when they think they're doing too much. To me, it's wonderful when families are involved. They care so much. They'll go to the lengths to help someone because it reflects those values they have about the sanctity of that person's life and the sanctity of them as a person. What lends itself to this often are different rituals. When you think about it, we have lots of rituals for people when they're young. We really don't have rituals for people when they're older. And yet I've seen people create these that are wonderful. I had one patient who had moderate to advanced Alzheimer's disease, was admitted to the nursing home, and her granddaughters came and they made her room the most beautiful room I've ever seen before, decorating it in streamers all over in colors, and they wrapped streamers around her walker. Um, it showed how much they honored her, and it built, the connections with them and the family were so strong because of that. Um, we need more rituals for people when they go through life transitions that we might not reflect upon as good. No one wants to think about moving into a nursing home as something positive, and yet we can make it positive. We can celebrate people's wisdom instead of, thinking of aging just in terms of a decline, a decrepitude, and whatnot. I think that's why a lot of people give up. They think, the parent is old, they're too old, there's not much we can do. They don't understand the fact that, aging can bring many strengths, and that people do have the capacity, regardless of age, to be able to make changes or make meaningful changes, and that can help address some of these estrangements and build upon it. And so, the best families are able to do that, to transcend those things, to give that respect, that empathy for people. And I think we have wonderful traditions that can inform that, and can model that for people.
Thank you, Dr. Agronin. Rabbi Zweig, if you could talk for 1 minute about prevention, about resiliency, and then we'll move on to audience questions.
It's a very deep topic. The one thing I want to say is that over many decades of being in education, the issue of self-esteem always arises. And I think self-esteem is critical for resilience. And to me, the biggest mistake that people make around self-esteem is that people are really only going to have self-esteem if they're proud of the choices that they make, much less so than the talents that God gave them, etc. And I think in order for a person to be able to handle difficult relationships, the constant refrain in their mind should be, am I proud of myself for the choices that I'm making? Am I proud of myself for cutting this person off, or for not making any attempts to try to rebuild a relationship? Am I really proud of that choice? And of course, if they could do it much earlier than that with many other choices, I think that would build a real strength within them that would allow them to handle and build a lot more.
Thank you, Rabbi. We're going to go to questions now from the audience. These first questions are from the Google Sheets, which was sent out on the text where we sent out the link. If you send your questions there, that's always best because we get them before, and we can incorporate them into how we ask the questions, as well as we can make sure we get to them. So the first question is, and those people who have asked have given their names, but we weren't sure if they wanted their names read, so just out of abundance of caution, we won't be saying their names while we ask their questions. But the first question is, in theory, Judaism has a special respect for our elders, but in practice, many lapse into excluding and neglecting our elders. Should we be surprised if the next generation follows our example by disrespecting us in the same way we disrespected our elders? So for Dr. Marc, how can we bridge this intergenerational gap?
This is a really strong interest of mine. So part of it is understanding aging better and educating people about the aging process. We tend to only look at aging from the standpoint of disease and decline. We need to realize that aging brings strengths, things like wisdom and resilience, creativity, purpose, and that these can enhance what someone is able to bring to their family and community and whatnot. And the way we teach that is to have younger people, younger generations, spend time with older individuals, get to know them, and ask them questions, and not just to be sort of a passive thing. So I think that's changing already, just because since people are living longer, healthier lifespans, they tend to be more active and more involved well into their 80s and 90s. And so just by, definition, people are seeing more of this and experiencing this in older relatives. But I think it's important in settings that we don't fall into ageist stereotypes and only focus on the aging process as something that is, a negative thing. And I would come back to, I think, just as we have celebrations of, bar mitzvah and, transitions when people are younger, we need to think about how can we celebrate people turning 80, 90, How can we, honor those transitions when people, do move into a different type of setting or when they retire? We need to do better with this. And, we're in an era where it's becoming routine, normal to do that compared to past years. I mean, the average lifespan in 1900 was 50. Now it's, in our 80s. And so, almost everyone is going to retire or going to, face these changes. And we need ways to incorporate, value-based celebrations and distinctions with this. And that will help reshape the way people look at aging and help build those intergenerational connections. And it's so important now because what technology has done is it's kind of driven generations apart because older generations often don't know or understand what maybe younger generations see in terms of social media. I think this will equalize over time, but we need to address this. I think one thing that COVID did do is it forced a lot of older people to use technology in ways that they never thought they could do before. In terms of whether using Zoom or doing anything like that. And so it was kind of an equalizer in that sense. But as this technology is accelerating so much, it can't just be in the hands of the young. It has to be something that people use across the lifespan.
Yeah, I know in my family we did a second bar mitzvah for my grandfather when he turned 83, which I understand is something that people are doing more and more. Thank God as people live older and older, and as you said, just coming up with new ways to do these, to do rituals for as people get older. It's be a very beautiful and meaningful thing.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah, as long as we don't have to do second brisses.
I second that. So for Rabbi Akiva, a question on the same theme: how can we have a moral code to deal with the next generation if our essential values of honoring parents and elders are eroded?
Yeah, it's definitely a hard question. One of the things that used to be so common would be families living near each other. And to me, that's a huge, huge deal. When families live near each other and it's possible for them to spend much more time with one another, I think that's really what the Torah advocates, especially in the arena of honoring our parents, which is specifically to spend time with them and take them places and help them in material ways. And a lot needs to be done in the world of education to promote that it's not best to live across the country, across the world, away from family, regardless of the fact that you might think, well, my better community is over there and my parents, are somewhere else. I think that really needs to be looked at deeply. People really need to focus on trying to spend time with each other by accomplishing the proximity challenge. Separate from that is, again, the premise of the question is if these things are being eroded. Part of what's seeped into the Jewish culture world as well, which is why we're having this panel discussion, acknowledging this is a real problem in our circles, is that the concept of real respect and the concept of real education, where we look to the elders for advice, that's not the common speak. Everybody's looking for the latest book and the latest this and the latest, and really the Torah says it perfectly. Children are not realizing the enormous value that their own lives will have and improve by really seeking the counsel of people that came before and trying to learn from them. So that's an educational battle as well. And lastly, like I advise in many of our classes, it's so important to have a trusted outside person that you ask questions to. Too many people are taking their lives into their own hands. And so if it's not your parents, make sure that it's somebody really, really good, somebody that doesn't just tell you the answers that you think you want to hear, somebody who knows you, cares about you, and loves you enough to tell you you're making a mistake here.
Thank you, Rabbi. The next question, which was someone else, which is for Adam. What can you do when a family member holds you in contempt and refuses to reconcile? So, small questions.
Well, you pretty much described most of my work right there. what we start with is I asked to see all the communication between those two parties or more in letters and in emails. And that gives me a very good idea of the tenor of the relationship. Hearing it from one person's mouth is very different from having a more objective view, hearing it from both sides. And when I read the communication, I can get a better idea from both sides. Then, depending upon how, assuming that this is a parent that has been estranged by a child, how often that parent has tried to reach out to the child, then we'll make a decision as to whether we need more time, because the last thing you want to do is just bombard that person with more need, or whether I will send out something on their behalf, and which what we call an amends letter. Whether the letter comes from me, whether it comes from the parent, it's a letter basically saying that um, we hear you. You have legitimate issues. You have legitimate concerns. And I'd like to talk about it in a safe, comfortable way with a mediator and see what I can do to grow, to be a better person, to be a better parent, to be a better to be a better person in this relationship, so that you don't have to suffer anymore, and that we can transform some of the difficulties that we've had in the past. Um, Unfortunately, only about 30% of those amends letters that I would send out would be agreed to. And then from there, we would move on to reconciliation, agreement, and then a celebration. But the scenario that you described is pretty much the ichor of what estrangement is all about. One person has determined that they have experienced conflict, they've experienced trauma, they've experienced neglect, and they don't want any contact anymore with the other person. And trying to get that person to change their mind at some time can be very challenging.
I actually have a question, and I'm gonna hijack the standard formula here, since about half the audience consists of people related to me. What would you say to someone that is trying to use this panel to somehow address level one trauma family wide across 50 or so people, um, and send an invite to this as some sort of, one pill solution to the vast majority of this family not talking to one another for over 10 years?
So I think that's we have a
Yeah.
general rule on these panels. First of all, I want to
Why don't you
acknowledge.
let the guy with the Harvard degree answer the question?
Okay,
Because I
thank
got
you.
into Harvard.
So we have a general rule on these panels. First of all, I want to acknowledge that that's a very difficult problem. It sounds like there's a lot going on, and in general, we don't get into individual cases.
No, it's half your audience is related to one another.
I understand that.
One person in the family invites 50 people in the family, and half of them show up, and that's half your audience. So very different situation. But why don't we let the Harvard?
I understand that. We're not going to go into specific cases. That I'm not going to allow my panelists to be put into that situation. As the moderator, that is my responsibility, and unfortunately, I do have some prerogative. I understand that you're going through something intense, and I empathize with that. And if you wish to speak to our panelists offline, you can send them a message. But as the moderator, I'm not going to allow my panelists to get in the middle of something that is deeply personal and emotive. It's not what they agreed to, and it's not what people came here for. So we're going to finish up with one more question because people have asked it, and Rabbi Akiva asked to speak on it. So in general, I do what the rabbi says. I feel like it's a good way to go about life. The question was, and I'll combine two questions because they're very similar. In what ways and to what extent should a sibling maintain a relationship with a sibling who has chosen to remove himself from communicating with the parents? This decision has created resentment for two reasons: seeing the pain caused to the parents and the added responsibility of parental care on the sibling who has still had a relationship with the parents. and I'll combine it with another question that was asked in the chat. Does the obligation of Kivud Avayim require one to endure psychological damage for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah? The reason why I've combined these is because, again, these are specific questions. They touch upon specific contextual issues, which I encourage the people who ask the question to reach out to Rabbi Zweig or other local Orthodox rabbi and/or Adam at aaronslegacy.com and work through your specific questions. But Rabbi Zweig did ask to speak generally on these issues, so I'm going to let the rabbi talk for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to give us some closing thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, as we just saw from our previous caller, yeah, emotions are very high, and this is a hugely important issue. And I also encourage that person to reach out to Aaron's Legacy directly. And I'm not even quite sure I understood the question, but that's a good example. It's a good example of what people are facing when they are dealing with conflict with closest family members. I think that, again, when we talk about abuse, psychological damage, and evaluating how much to maintain relationship, we have to measure the loss versus the cost benefit, right? The loss versus the gain. And we also have to ask ourselves, can we ruin our lives, to handle the situation? I believe, and there are much bigger experts on the panel here than me, but I believe that the classic, need for therapy and psychology is, can I run my day-to-day life, or am I dealing with issues that I can't actually run my day-to-day life, because it's just interfering with my ability to cope too much. And everybody has to know their threshold, and everybody has to know what they can handle. But it's hugely important for siblings to maintain relationships with each other. It's hugely important, as Dr. Agronin mentioned, and Adam mentioned also, we have to take care of each other, and aging parents is a huge deal, and it's not ever fair for the burden to fall to one person versus other people. And by the way, proactively, there's lots that people can do in advance by trying to help their parents get set up financially and, prepare, make plans for various contingencies. Not always easy to get to, but definitely an ounce of prevention is worth a lot of pounds of problems in the future. And so, of course, for those reasons, it's important to maintain relationship. Again, the halachic definition of these things is what really is the damage. And so much of it depends on what I can handle. And I think it's so important to do as much as we can handle without compromising other very important things in our lives. But this should be one of the truly important things in our lives. And we try to figure out ways to handle as much as we can.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'm going to give the same question to all three participants, all three panelists. We're going to go Dr. Agronin, Adam. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to give my closing spiel, and then as we start everything with Torah, we end everything with Torah, and I'll give it to Rabbi Zweig to summarize and close us out. So the question is, first to Dr. Agronin, what are some key practical takeaways on how we can begin to heal the estrangement rifts in our lives?
Well, first of all, thank you for setting this up, and for me, a very special honor to be part of this, and especially with Rabbi Zweig and with Adam. I think at the end of the day, people need to decide, are they willing and interested to make a difference, to make things better? Are they willing to, put aside having to always be absolutely right in their own mind for the sake of a connection, a relationship? And if they're able to do that, that begins the process. It doesn't end the process, it begins the process. Clearly, the person, who was posing the question, there's a lot of emotion there. As Rabbi mentioned, it's pretty clear and obvious. And maybe it's someone's way of beginning to reach out in some way. Sometimes the way people reach out can be awkward, can be difficult, can be flat-footed. It doesn't make a difference if there is an interest and intent to try to make something better. I mean, that's the whole point of thinking about Aaron's legacy. I love that. What Aaron wanted to do was to, push those boundaries and get to a better point, a point of peace between people. If that's the commitment, there are ways to move along the pathway, but people have to be at least willing to take those first steps, and that can make a difference. If you're not, then, unfortunately, people do suffer. And it's too bad that people suffer like that when there are ways to make a difference. So I just, my way of ending by endorsing what Adam's doing 1,000%. And really, I think it can make such a meaningful difference in people's lives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agronin. Adam, please, what are some practical takeaways, and how can we begin to heal that estrangement rift in our lives?
Look, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote a beautiful book called Morality. The year that he passed away, it was published. And in that book, he talks about how we went from we to I, starting in the mid 60s, when the traditions that we in this country and we as a Jewish people lived by began to fracture. As we went from a we culture, looking at, as John Kennedy said, what we can do for others instead of what we can do for ourselves, we were healthier, our relationships were stronger, our families were stronger, and our traditions were stronger. As we move into an I world where it's about me, my individualism, my need to define myself, my need to serve myself, my need to therapize myself. These, unfortunately, there's some good, but there's some bad as well, because we leave a lot behind. And so I would say that to avoid estrangement, to avoid difficulties in our lives, we should start going back to the we. How can we serve other people? You know, the gentleman mentioned Harvard. Harvard is a very esteemed, obviously, both university and a place of study. Since 1952, the longest running study in the United States has been run. Every year, they ask the question and they answer it with research. What is the most important thing to people's happiness? And every single year since 1952, the answer has been relationships. The quality of your relationships is the most important factor in determining your happiness. And there is no more fundamental relationship, whether we like it or not. There is no more important and definitive relationship, whether we like it or not, as our family. And to live in opposition and in conflict and in pain and in distance from our family affects us, each and every one of us. So the default should not be to cut off our family. The default should be to make it work, to give everything you can to try to make your relationships work, and you will be a happier person.
Thank you, Adam. I want to thank everyone on behalf of Ohad and myself. Ohad does all the work behind the scenes, and I who get all the credit. I want to thank you all for joining us here for this deeply meaningful and important conversation, as well as those who will be watching us later on YouTube. Thank you for joining. Everyone, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as joining our various WhatsApp groups to stay up to date with the latest going on with Rabbi Zweig's Torah and Rabbi Zweig's classes, as well as future panels like these. I want to wish everyone an easy, meaningful rest of your fast. I hope we helped pass some of the time and gave some important conversations around the issues of our families, both our nuclear families, both our biological families, but as well as our family in Klal Yisrael, and how we can mend those fences a little bit as well. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you specifically to our two incredible panelists. It's an absolute honor and privilege for me to be able to ask questions of people like you, bring your expertise. As Ohad knows, I was on with him before, and my biggest problem with these panels is whittling down the questions I have to doing something that's vaguely looks something like an hour, even though we've gone well over an hour, but it vaguely looks something like an hour. We really appreciate your time. You can find Adam at aaronslegacy.com. I posted in the chat, and Dr. Agronin with the Miami Mind. You can find Dr. Agronin with Miami Jewish Federation and Mind over there. And please support their work. They're incredible people doing incredible things for the Jewish people. And with that, Rabbi, if you can take us out,
Sure.
give us the Torah perspective, and thank you again to everyone. We really appreciate you all.
Thank you.
So yeah, Dr. Agronin, Adam, really awesome. Thank you. Can't thank you enough. Our audience probably doesn't know that we're not paying our panelists, and
You're not?
yeah, sorry to drop that on you like that, but it's true. Um, and it is so valuable to have such quality counsel from really such experts, and it means so much to us at the yeshiva and to our whole community. Uh, Ohad, please post the information to all of our chats on Aaron's legacy and on Dr. Agronin, even though he's, I'll probably go through, you're way too busy, but nonetheless, let's try to get as many people the information as possible. I would just conclude with some questions that have just been posted here on the chat. I think it's important to maintain the grit and resilience that we're talking about, but also there should be an eye towards making progress. The goal is not to just stick it out and to have the same repeat conversations again and again with people in our close family relationships. There's no question that the end goal, as the prophets tell us, is v'heshiv le'banim alavosam le'vavos al banim. The ultimate future is that there will be full familial reconciliation between parents and children, and that is a critical component to every human being. The most that we can do now to prepare for that should certainly be a merit for the Mashiach to come, and we want forward progress. But I also want to point out, and I think it's not more timely than everything we're experiencing in the world and the 3 weeks. The Jewish people are an amazing, amazing group of people. And more panel discussions like this, where we're helping more fellow Jews, you will be shocked at how quickly we can change the tide towards much better outcomes, because God gave the Jewish people the ability to do just that. With the guidance of the Torah, with the care and concern that we learn from the Torah for our fellow Jews, with the brilliance of the Torah and the brilliance of the people that God bestowed upon the Jewish people, it is possible to get much, 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 much better outcomes. Just like Israel has demonstrated against their enemies, so too we should be able to demonstrate with the shalom inside our own people. We're all fellow Jews here, and we're all doing this work together. And Adam's points and Dr. Agronin's points were so on target and so useful. And even if we help one person who helps another person, you can turn a family around. And that's just totally worth it. And God willing, we will be zocha to do that and overcome the baseless hatred that we've suffered from for generations towards really building shalom with one another. And we can use technology to that end, with as devastating as it tends to be in other ways, like we're doing tonight, and God willing, more in the future. Have an easy, meaningful, everyone, and God willing, the 3 weeks we should get through without real problems, and Mashiach coming very soon, and Geula Shlema.